Hi everyone, this is Kristen. I am MotorTrend Senior Features Editor, and I just want to take this opportunity while everyone's setting up to thank BlackBerry for being a continued and wonderful partner for MotorTrend over these past 2+ years for our software-defined vehicles movement. Also, MotorTrend's SDV Innovator Awards nominations closed last Friday, and we've received many nominations globally. However, if you still want to nominate, you should come find me after this, or head over to Google and look up SDV Awards and MotorTrend for more details. So without further ado, this is our panel, The Future of Digital Experiences in the Smart City, and I will invite my panelists to come up to join me at this time. So as you can see, we have a very, very exciting and experience-full panel of speakers here. We have Philipp and John, Michael, and Máuhan. And I'll just kick it off right away. Smart cities, it's kind of this very utopia-looking world we live in where everything is connected and it's efficient and everything is taken care of for everyone. And as we all know, we're not quite there yet, but there are aspects that we are currently living in, but there's still more strides to make. So I think I want to start small. I want to start with a user experience right now. So I will start with Máuhan, who is the head of innovation at Spotify. And I want to ask, with an app as big as Spotify, we have hundreds of millions of users. What do you do to make it safe and secure and human-centric, and how do you make it a Spotify-specific experience for everyone? How can they benefit?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the theme of a lot of these discussions, I think there's definitely the security aspect and personal information and things like that. But I actually think to the point of human-centered design, that's a big part of it. Like, how do you make this app and this experience accessible to a lot of people? How do you make the content fit and the content be enjoyable? I have an example of something we've done pretty recently, which was add translation services to automated AI-based translation to all of the podcasts and all the talk content. I think that was a plan for broadening our reach, broadening accessibility, and being more native. The thing that I really love about Spotify, like when I joined, I think the thing I talked about the most was this idea of owning one of the 5 senses as well. Like, we own hearing. And I don't mean own like we control it, but we own it in senses we get to influence it. And you have 500 million people tuning in and putting their headphones on every day. And I always thought, how can you actually create an experience that gets to live with them, whether that's at work, in the car, studying, working out, whatever it is, and how do you kind of tailor that experience through that? And so one of the things we think about a lot of user experience is not just what are the buttons in the app and the experience in the app and the personalization and the recommendations and making sure we're playing what you love, but it's how do you actually co-pilot an experience along with somebody for their day. So a lot's gone into that in terms of how do we AI DJ and how do we make personalized playlists that are contextually aware, and how do you kind of be part of that?
Thank you. I'm glad you brought up the point about accessibility, because in preparing for this panel, one of the things I was thinking about was how we can expand the idea of a smart city to benefit the most vulnerable members of our society, because it doesn't do just to have it focused on one single class of people. It has to be for everyone, and that it does involve personal transportation. We're holding this panel in New York City, which has a very, very contentious relationship with cars. So I thought that would be a nice segue to ask you, Philipp, Mercedes-Benz MBUX is one of the leading systems in cars, and how do you see cars, private vehicles fitting into the idea of a smart city? Because I don't think you can separate cars and cities at this point. It's not possible. So how do we integrate it more easily? And
I think you'll probably never be able to separate them. Our desire for moving transportation is just too high. I think there is a responsibility that all the players have. And I really view the cities as aggregators of information, because we as the automotive companies have some of each, I'll call it consumer, inhabitant of the city, whether you're a user, whether you're living there, working there, visiting there, each of you have pieces of information. But you need to aggregate them all to provide benefit in the end. Thinking of earlier this year, I was in Japan using their Google Maps on public transportation. And it could tell you exactly where to line up on the platform to catch the train, so that way you're in the best position to transit to the next person. And I think that's a perfect example where you have multiple parties aggregating the information. And I think we can do that also for traffic information. Mercedes already today, each of our cars take the sensor data from the dampers, from the suspension system, and can, from that, recognize where there are potholes or speed bumps. Now, we can transmit that to warn you where there is such a thing coming up. But we also have partnership, for example, with the city of Boston, where we give the city access to that kind of data. You can expand that to find where do you have regular emergency braking or so. You talk about vulnerable road users, to find out where are the hot spots and work in there together with the cities to really make it a safer environment for everyone.
And that's a unfathomable amount of data, I think. Let's say everybody has a Mercedes car that can do that. And then we can say, expanding beyond Mercedes, everybody's car can do that. And they're feeding all of that information, all of that different streams of knowledge into the city. We need to standardize it, of course, right? So that's actually something I want to punt towards John about standardization. What does standardization play in all of this? What systems need to be standardized in order to make this smoother?
In a word, all of them in a smart city. I think that obviously I'm very focused on automotive in my role, and I have the luxury and the privilege of working with just about every OEM in the world. And what we see is lots of capability, lots of data. The car is going to become the most complex IoT endpoint, generating the most amount of data with the most amount of sensors, but they're all talking a different language, essentially. And so you can do mitigations by providing data to the cities after the fact, for potholes, things that can be dealt with, they're not immediate needs. But if you really want real-time data from the vehicle, road conditions, wheel spin, these types of things, there has to be a standard that the cars are talking in a common way. Right now the cars are all very different. If you compare a Mercedes to a BMW from an architectural perspective, they're different, they're very different. So we need kind of a layer within the vehicles. And this is not just, I'm using the vehicle as an example, I think it's all IoT endpoint devices where you have kind of a normalization of data, and that you also have use case data. So you're not sending terabytes of data to the city, you're sending very specific insights from the vehicle. I think smart cities are going to be a developing thing. It's like, I think to autonomous drive, you're on a hype curve. Everybody thought we were going to have cars with no steering wheels, no brakes by 2020. We know that's not true. We're focused on safety. So I think the smart city is a very similar thing. It's going to be a very gradual implementation, a building of infrastructure. It's very costly, but standards is going to be a very large part of it.
And kind of based on what I'm picking up as the general theme of this afternoon's segment is safety and security. And I think there is some skepticism, concern publicly over data breaches and security breaches, things like that. So I actually want to ask Michael what you've seen over how we can foster the public trust, because we are asking people to hand over a lot of their private data. I mean, we've seen articles go up where cars now can track where you've been, where they say that they're not sending the information anywhere, and we have to trust them. Facebook, Apple, everything like that. What do we do now that we want cities to start looking at that information as well? How do we foster that trust with people?
That's a great question. So firstly, Invest Ottawa as a company is not part of the city. It's actually a nonprofit delivering services for the city, the province, the federal government, and we also do some work in supporting industry as well. So we play that kind of catalyst role in the center. And so to directly answer your question, I think the way to ensure that you've got public trust is you pull together projects that involve the regulator, that involve industry big and small, because you want to have an economic hit while you do this. And you also want to include, where you can, the applied research from academia. and you want to test the project in a safe area. We have something called AreaX.0 that is a private testing ground that we've put in place on a giant federal farm. It's like an 1,800-acre farm, very close to the downtown of Ottawa, which is extremely unusual. We test it, we make sure it's burned in. The most recent one we did was a smart intersection test. We tested it first at AreaX.0, then we brought it out into the public domain, and we tested it in the high-density tech area of Ottawa. In Canada, actually, is Canada, the highest density tech community that we have in the country. And we were able to showcase it in a way that was visible to the public. And that actually really plays well for both the regulator and also the public, because the regulator is doing policy hacking while you're going through this. They want to open up these markets just like everyone else does, but they want to do it in a way where you don't lose footing by moving too quickly and confusing the public with what is out there. So access to data is an extremely important part of this. When we did the smart intersection test, we tapped into something from the University of Warwick. They have something called Safety Pool. Safety Pool is a database of over 100,000 previous tests that have been done that we were able to draw upon even before doing the private testing of smart intersection. When our project was completed, we actually delivered that data back into Safety Pool as a means in which you can actually open up a market by not being crazy about holding on to data that will actually allow that market to move more quickly by virtue of making the market safer for everyone. So those sorts of things matter when you're trying out projects. We've done 4 different projects now at Transport Canada. That's just one of them, and they all involve the public. I think that's an extremely important thing to do.
In my experience and just covering data and technological innovations, it seems to me historically that governments have been a little slower to respond to these innovations and changes. So I'm curious if, this is also open to all of you guys, I'm curious if there's a way that you think that government officials and policymakers can be better integrated into this kind of planning moving forward, so it's not so much just a reaction as opposed to more of a symbiotic growth.
I could start if that would be okay. So I think governments have got a pretty tough job, and I think cities have a really tough job. At this point, when you think about public expectations, when you think about the high cost of everything, you've got a citizenry that the last thing they want to hear about is taxes rising because of, even though inflation seems to be trickling down a little bit, the cost of everything is still off the charts. Well, the cost of everything is still off the charts for cities as well. So when you see something new that you need to do, there needs to be a return for a city that would include social return on investment, political return on investment, in addition to what we would all normally look at in terms of operational, so financial return. And it's got to work, it's got to make sense. So I think cities have got kind of a tough slog, but something I wanted to share as part of this forum is, last week I had the opportunity to be part of the World Economic Forum's Urban Transformation Summit. It was in Detroit, and we had over 300 people at this event. And the topic was entirely this. It's entirely around how you help cities to move forward with so much pressure in so many different areas. And one of the areas that I thought was most important to share today is an announcement was made last week as part of the summit to announce a global alliance for innovation ecosystems, so Urban Innovation Alliance. And the alliance includes the World Economic Forum, it includes Invest Ottawa, we're the co-chair of this new alliance, along with Bedrock Detroit, which is a commercial real estate firm that is really helping to transform Detroit's landscape, improve it, revitalize it, and San Francisco, who have, for those of you that perhaps are watching this, they launched a program called Yes San Francisco in June, which was a sustainability challenge that they released in order to try to revitalize the downtown core of San Francisco. I love San Francisco. It's very hard to see what the downtown core is like these days. And so the World Economic Forum actually broadcast this challenge. They received 140 really creative bids that they're evaluating right now. In the next 3 months, they'll select which ones to do, but they're there to try to drive, I think it's 8 different sustainability development goals that they've put out there. It's kind of exciting what is possible when you start to think about it more broadly outside of your own region. Because on your own, it's really hard to make the difference. So seeing initiatives like that, I think will have an impact.
I think a little bit more, I mean, that's an excellent explanation, but I think at a more simple level, the technology is moving faster than the people in government can really keep up on. And I'll give you a very simple example. I don't remember the car maker. It was a German car maker, launched an L3 system. Well, no, I know you did just recently, were part of that system. But and the challenge in Canada for Transport Canada was, how do we test this? And they didn't know how to validate the system. And I think we've seen in Europe where some of these systems actually get ring-fenced, geo-fenced. If you go into a certain country, if you go from Germany to Austria, the system turns off. So it's very challenging, the pace of innovation for the regulators to keep up. I'm not quite sure how you solve that, but it's a very difficult problem.
So, following on that note, because I was actually thinking exactly to your point, Kristen, the government, how are they going to have the expertise, that level of depth to keep up with all this?
Exactly.
And I think this is where we also as industry have a responsibility to work together. And picking up on that example, so level 3, as you referred to it, there are different levels of autonomy. SAE defined that, the Society of Automotive Engineers. Level 3 is sort of that magical point where for the first time you can actually take legally your eyes off the road and your hands off the steering wheel. And that's really the shift from going from a driver assistance system to an autonomous vehicle system. And so far, proud to say, Mercedes-Benz is the only OEM in the world that has achieved that level of certification currently in Germany, in Nevada, and in California. And as part of this, as we received that certification in California this year, but we've back in 2018 already been working with the California Highway Patrol, with the California DMV and other regulators to work together on doing tests together, not just to educate them, but to evolve the system together. So that we were doing tests with the California Highway Patrol. If they're coming with the sirens on, does the vehicle detect that? In California, lane splitting is legal, that you can, for motorcyclists, that the car will move to the side. All these things, so that by the time we were ready to submit our application, they knew what they were dealing with. They had been in the car. I rode in the car with CHP. I rode in the car with members of DMV. I was answering their questions. So they knew what they were dealing with. And I think that takes time and patience on both sides and an open dialogue. And so my recommendation would be start that dialogue early on. And everyone who I've met as part of this journey on the government side has been very welcoming and very supportive, because they have the same goal as we do, which is to keep everyone safe.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say you should have the government ride along with you during the process, but I think you made it a little bit more literal.
And I think the big question also is, why aren't we there yet? We started talking about it a little bit here. It's like there's massive obstacles in the way, and we have small examples of a smart city, right? Like digital libraries and bicycle sharing system and smart grid. Like these are all really good steps in the right direction. But to truly achieve that smart city, like what do you guys, in your opinion, is really, do you think is standing in our way? The biggest obstacle?
I mean, I think, Jen, you had a good point there, standardization. I don't know who here in the room is setting up or has set up a smart home. Yeah, just alone on my home, it's so difficult to set pieces up to work together, and every device so it has its own standard. On a city, you're dealing with, in my opinion, the exact same problem, just on a much grander scale. And at home, it's just me and my wife and my daughters that have to interact with us. In a city, you have a lot more different interests. But I think that is the problem of how do you make these pieces work together and align the interests.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the analogy of the apps in your home, because I don't have a single app that controls all the things in my house. So we're fumbling through all these different apps. And to your point, it's on a much larger scale, much more expensive scale. I believe standardization is going to be a big part of it, but I also believe it's like building anything well. You do it over time, you learn, especially now because we're talking about the data privacy, cybersecurity. This isn't something you could just throw together quickly. I mean, it's an extremely complex task. I think it's going to be very similar to autonomous drive. It's going to be a gradual buildup, and that gradual buildup will have two effects. Very similar to autonomous drive, I think the consumer would not accept from one day to the next not having a steering wheel in their car. I think you want to introduce safety features that make them more comfortable, that the car has some control, and you do this very gradually. I think the smart cities are going to be exactly the same way. It's going to be gradual introductions of new technologies, to Michael's point, that benefits the public, that the public sees is a benefit to them. It'll be done in a thoughtful way that protects data and the highest levels of cybersecurity, and it'll be a multi-generational thing.
I was going to add in, just to build on a point I was making earlier. With Area X.0, we established essentially a smart city playground. So we have a way in which to test things before you get out into the real world. And the only reason that's possible is the investments that we've actually gotten from the city, the province, and the federal government. They're very committed actually to the work. So we do, anytime we do an install, for example, of putting in an intersection, we even have a smart level rail crossing, the gates. You've got control mechanisms back in our main control room. It's all installed to city spec, and it's hooked up to live city infrastructure. So the city can actually see it in their own control rooms. So they're very active with us, even with things like the Smart Intersection project. With the city, we built out a method in which innovators can work with us to onboard, and provided we've done a private testing first and the city approves it, they will allow them to do testing in public areas. Obviously, you got to follow a process, but we have an intake model with all the infrastructure in place. So the marginal cost of actually testing new scenarios is really quite low. We've already made the core investments. Those things I think are really important. I think the point earlier in establishing standards and having some of the infrastructure available. In the city of Ottawa, 64,000 light standards have been upgraded to LED lights. While they're at it, they put fiber in every one of them. So the possibilities are there, right? They've planted and they've kind of future-proofed what is possible. Not exactly sure where that will lead, from things like if somebody has a first responder requirement and the light on the street is flashing outside your home, just to make it easier for the first responder to find you. But you can go all the way with different kinds of possible scenarios that this kind of infrastructure can open up and provide. We had at Transport Canada Expo 2 weeks ago, 1,200 people come and check out Area X.0, 80 exhibitors from across Canada. And next year, with the new alliance with World Economic Forum, we're going to have a showcase at Area X.0 with innovators from around the world that are concerned about urban environments. So I think getting a profile on it, getting some comfort out there, putting a spotlight on having the citizenry understand what is possible is an extremely important part of figuring out how to do this. And I think having the regulators with you, they can really help to open up those markets. Without them, the doors are shut. You really can't do a lot outside of private testing.
Yeah, maybe take a somewhat other side of that coin. When you asked that question, actually the first thing that came to my mind was, is maybe it's a provocation, but is government actually an accelerant, or is it the public sector slowing down advancement? For whatever reasons, right? It's probably, it's good public policy oriented intent, but I think back to things like Uber, like how difficult that was to expand, and they just sort of had to go rogue and push it through. So my provocation, or my question would be, is it actually helping or slowing things down? But on the third side of the coin, I would also say public sentiment is something that I always wonder about. these things can be like scary for people. And we were talking yesterday a little bit about what Sidewalk Labs was trying to do in Toronto with their smart city, and that was government supported, but citizen rejected heavily. And that was a pretty cool project. And so I think beyond all great answers in terms of the technical and the operational limitations, I also wonder if it's sentiment and policy limitations that prevent it more so than our ability to do it. Because you can look abroad and see other countries build linear cities in the middle of the desert pretty quickly when the rules are a little bit more flexible.
To pivot slightly, Máuhan, you said Spotify is like 500 million subscribers. That's the number?
More. Yeah, over half a billion.
So like an incredible number of people who use Spotify, probably daily. And as head of innovation, I'm sure there are ideas that you and your team work on that are very radical, but do you find that you have to move a little slower so as not to like spook all of those 500 million people? Because I think people are generally creatures of habit. So if something really strange and new shows up on the interface perhaps, or maybe a way that they interact with your product, do you risk losing people in that path?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's happened in the past, right? I mean, everything from toying with synthetic artists and creators onto the platform. The interesting thing, it's like we have I have probably 26 apps on my phone that track my location. And I was really big on adding contextualization to what you're listening to and what you're consuming, so that everything to the point where like you walk in Nolita and I could have a podcaster talk about going to Prince Street Pizza or whatever it is, right? Man, we had insane rebellion when we just asked for location permissions. So even like those little things scare people, let alone, trying to introduce things that when we basically can tell like what you're listening to, what mood you're in and what sentiment you're in, and we can feed you content that targets that. That kind of stuff tends to spook people. But yeah, so I think it's all how do you make it digestible and slow roll it, and the AI DJ is an interesting product that we've released that really builds on your prior listening experience and your behavior. And I think that one's actually a really elegant way of doing it, where it feels very native and natural and tailored to you. But I think personalization sometimes can go the spooky way as well.
Yeah, I mean, and with something like Spotify, it has I think the market control on music streaming, but it also is an elective service. So if you move too far in one direction, people can just decide to bounce, and that's it. But with a city, what are people supposed to do? Like move? So I think trying to balance that with, as you guys talked about, public policy and government, and also making sure that it does cater to the citizens. It's a very, very difficult line to walk.
That was a great segue. Very nice.
I do this professionally. Well, we have 2.5 minutes left, but I think one of the things that we do want to focus on here in the end, just to wrap everything up, is the idea of trust. I know we kind of made that a theme through all of this, but I know so many people who just don't want the location testing or the location capture, just like you said, and they don't want people to know where they are, and they don't want the government to have their information, like the tin hat, whatever you want, whatever you want to call it. And part of me wonder, I'm going to play devil's advocate, part of me wonders, like, is it necessary for us to push all these innovations on people who maybe don't want it, who don't need it? Do we know better than them? Do we think we know better? I know that's kind of a thorny question.
Look, my gig is being disruptive and innovative, and I would surprisingly say that no, you don't need to force it on people, and you don't need to push. I think rooting things. You mentioned human-centered design when you kicked this off, like rooting things in problems, and so what can you do to solve something, is probably the best way to approach it. I think a lot of things that go after public challenges or public goods or public problems sometimes come with a commercial impulse behind it, and if it actually goes towards solving the problem, it typically tends to end up better. But yeah, otherwise there's a lot of wouldn't this be cool, and couldn't we make a lot of money, so let's force it down people's throats approach. And I'd say no, my short answer is no, we should not or don't have to do that.
I think that's the skeptic in me, is that a lot of things I see are good ideas and good services, but in the end they do get abused by people who are looking to profit. Like, I thought Airbnb was a really good idea when it first started, but as you know, it did contribute to a housing crisis, and all of these other systems were bad, and then now the experience is bad for everyone. So I think there is going to be a push and pull, and I don't have the answer. I really hope that with the onward march of tech and innovation, we keep these things in mind and try to keep all of these things in check. And I understand it is everyone's right to be a part of this journey and to try to get ahead in whatever way they can. I guess it's just caution, just exercise caution is the thing that I would leave off with.
Act responsible.
Act responsible,
to
be
have
good.
Trust.
Be good.
Your point, trust.
I want to see your L3 take on FDR Drive at rush hour, by the way. Call me when you guys can do that. That will be very, very impressive to me.
You know, the real value, if you provide value, people will open up their data. It's really that cut and dried. If you're not providing value, there's more hesitancy to open up, in my view.
Value and also convenience.
Yep.
I think convenience is the big thing that maybe we didn't talk about yet, is people are very lazy. So if you can have a service that's cheaper, that's more convenient for them and their situation than whatever it is currently, it will be much, much easier. But doing that, I think, requires such a big understanding of how people live. And in a city of, here, millions and millions of people, it's tough to find a one-size-fits-all solution.
Can I add just one little point? I know we're right at time, but I had the opportunity to be on a panel in San Francisco in July, the Transportation Review Board. And one of the most fascinating presentations I saw was from the Director of Transportation from the city. And what he was conveying was they have so much autonomous vehicle testing in the core of San Francisco that they've had first responder incidents where the vehicles get confused and they're in the way, like they're physically in the way of a fire, and they have to be physically removed so that firefighters can actually get in. So unintended consequences when you're trying to explore and you're trying to be disruptive. When you're in a city environment, it can feel slow sometimes, but San Francisco's pushing the envelope, and we're all like, oh no, you can't stop, you got to keep going because you're helping us to all move forward. And that was a bit humbling to hear, because what it requires is something needs to be done to be able to resolve that major issue. That's a big issue. Somebody could die in a circumstance like that. So, as much as we all want to be experiencing a Jetsons kind of lifestyle, of which, by the way, George Jetson, if you follow the cartoon, he would have been born last year, because it was a 100-year thing. 2062 is when the Jetsons would have been released. So if we want to get there, we're going to have to try some things, but we're also going to have to make sure that we don't take such a big setback because we went too fast and we didn't really plan it out properly. And those things will happen in a city environment.
Couldn't have put it better myself. Thank you so much, guys, for being a part of this, and thank you all for the audience.